everyone, Anark here, and this is another installment of Anark Abridged. So today's video is kind of part 3 of these last few Anark Abridged videos, and I have been focusing on the ecology and environmental problems and how this relates to left radicalism or revolutionary activity, but I've sort of held off on discussing the specifics about how we actually do anything about it. I've kind of stayed in the realm of abstraction and talked mostly about theory and maybe a tiny bit of science mixed in. But in this video, I want to talk about how we are going to defend the ecology. So as I get started, I just want to point out, of course, obviously I've got these new glasses on, and that's because you see the old glasses broke. I didn't willingly make this transition. I know. You can give me your opinions on these new glasses down in the comments as you please, but these are the replacements for now. Perhaps I'll come back to just the circle glasses if I can get replacements for those. But today, I'm going to talk about something much more important than my glasses, and that is what kind of activity can we carry out to act in defense of the ecology. So, as I discussed in the last 2 parts of this video, we have to start with an understanding that hierarchical solutions simply aren't going to work. Hierarchy is the problem. It cannot be the solution. And the continuation of these hierarchical power structures only guarantees that ecological collapse will get worse and worse in the future. There is no way out of that bind. We could possibly green the system to some degree, but that greening of the system would never allow us to change the fundamental nature of that system and how that it functions, how hierarchical power functions at its fundamental level. So we know that in our solutions, we can't be looking to beg the government to change itself because the government is a fundamentally hierarchical power structure. And we can't be hoping that what we're going to do is seize into some position of power and then enact some new hierarchical method for controlling the ecology. Because that would be fundamentally reproducing all of the same problems that we started with. That would be treading the same path that brought us here. So I know those are the favored solutions of a lot of people, even people that consider themselves socialists or communists. Often those are the sorts of solutions which they imagine. They think the state needs to put in place stricter regulations on corporations, that we need to do all, one schema or another, carbon tax credits or subsidizing green energy and so on and so on. They've got a million ideas. And, if you're some kind of revolutionary and you actually think this might work, perhaps you want to practice some kind of eco-Bolshevism where you seize the state and put in place some, new utopic modernist order where you impose an ecological society upon the ecology. But as we've discussed, none of that could work. It's not that I'm expressing skepticism. I'm expressing that it is foundationally impossible for any of those things to work. Those would be utilizing the very tools that are destroying the ecology to begin with. So it's understandable how, upon hearing that, somebody might feel distressed. I could see how that might make you feel hopeless, because those seem like the only solutions on hand. A lot of people think that that's what being realistic is using one of those methods or another. But if you've been around on this channel for a while, you know that I am a revolutionary, that I do not believe that we should be looking for ways to, edit the system that currently stands around the corners, change marginalia about how it functions. You know that I think we have to fundamentally transform the system. And in order to do that, we have to basically build a new system within the shell of the current society. So this is this topic that I've returned to numerous times in these Anark Abridged videos, but I've returned to numerous times in the rest of my work as well, because it's really the central precept. And that is this concept of prefiguration, sometimes conceived of as building dual power. The idea of prefiguration is building the new in the shell of the old. And that is not to say editing the old until it becomes the new. It is to say that we are building a replacement structure while we are still forced to exist within the dominant hierarchical society. Obviously, you can't disentangle yourself completely from the current system. This is part of the reason why I've expressed some skepticism or criticism of the usage of personal boycotts. What you have to do is you have to develop a systemic response. You have to build new types of structures, new organizations that function in this fundamentally horizontal means, and that they themselves embody an ecological cooperation or ecological harmony, that they take seriously their job as stewards of the environment. This is one really important aspect, and it's an aspect we're going to talk about more in depth as we proceed. But as it has often been said that anarchism is both a creative and a destructive impulse, there also has to crucially be some aspect where we are dismantling the old system. So don't take what I said just a minute ago as a criticism of the idea that we should be trying to, that we shouldn't celebrate regulation of capital or the subsidization of green energy. Those are still good things on measure. Those just can't be the total solutions. There are things that are worth fighting for in the meantime. If you have made it your task to fight for one of those things, I'm not saying that that's meaningless. Those things will have a meaningful impact. They just will not be sufficient. The sufficient activity is this revolutionary activity. However, as I said, there will also be a destructive aspect of this. And the destructive aspect is that we will have to be tearing down those old systems. Some amount of this is going to be setting up a direct action to impede the development of things that are doing ecological damage. We can use one example. Look at Cop City in Atlanta. They are building an extensive police training facility out in Weelaunee Forest, just outside of Atlanta. And this training facility is being built at a particularly dangerous place for the local ecology. Weelaunee Forest is very important. It is an ecological linchpin. And furthermore, it is situated over a water table. So if they build Cop City, this will be enormously impactful on the local ecology. It's going to cause severe problems, not just for the forest, but for the water table. It will impact not only the natural world, or the non-human natural world, but the human natural world. It's going to have enormous impacts. And at the same time, of course, it is a hierarchical, it is a body that is being built in assistance of hierarchical power. So it's pretty obvious that understanding that there also has to be some aspect of destruction, that Cop City must never be built. And this has and will almost certainly entail some amount of direct action to stop the machinery, the tools, and so on from actually building those structures. There will have to be direct intervention upon the process of construction to stop construction from taking place, to stop the ecological havoc from taking place, to stop them from cutting down the forest. And that will entail all kinds of things. I can't advocate directly a bunch of the things that will be necessary in that process, but I think it's pretty obvious some measure of extended sabotage will probably be necessary to make that venture unprofitable for them, that it will not be worth building Cop City because of how much money they are losing in equipment and stalled, being stalled by these actions, by the terrible press, by the extending backlash that is taking place as more citizens of Atlanta and people abroad see the danger of the construction of Cop City. And those actions are justifiable. It should be said, nobody who has that cares about the environment and nobody who has an anti-hierarchical conception should ever condemn the actions that are being done to prevent the construction of Cop City. So this is one example I'm giving. I'm trying to use something that's topical, but I hope you understand that these are kind of generalizations, right? We can see that, for example, that this is kind of a reoccurring process, but it takes place in different contexts each time. So we also had the North Dakota access pipeline, right? We were all very familiar with Standing Rock and what took place there and the very brave activities that took place there. I think the only criticism that might be made, given the things we just discussed, is that there was probably not an extensive enough campaign of direct sabotage. And that's not to criticize the people that were there. I understand the people that were there put their lives on the line. It was very inspiring to watch. I was very inspired by the whole process, and I hope that nobody, if anybody was involved in Standing Rock and anything that happened there, that you don't think that I'm saying that that was not worth it, or that I have like deep criticisms of the approach. But I do think the approach lacked that fundamental or that necessary component of sabotage. And I understand there was extreme militarization that was present, but we are going to have to act in these future actions as they extend these oil pipelines, as they continue to wreak ecological havoc. We are going to have to be willing to do things that are very dangerous, things that appear as if the backlash could get people hurt, but unfortunately, the scale of the ecological crisis is such that those actions are justified. Those actions are acts of self-defense. And we are going to be forced to carry out acts of greater and greater desperation and sabotage as these anti-ecological, as these hierarchical structures are built out. It is going to become more and more necessary that there will be those brave few, and I hope maybe not so few, that carry out these acts of sabotage. And might I also add on top of this that please don't get caught. If you're involved in it, there's no reason to get caught and grandstand. It's most important, if you do these things, that you escape apprehension. Let's hope this video doesn't get demonetized. But I want to emphasize that though those actions are absolutely necessary, that those are 100% a component of the successful action, that they in themselves would not be sufficient. And the reason for that is they may halt the expansion of this ecological devastation, but they will not go towards solving the root problem, which is hierarchical power structures themselves. They will not dismantle the state. They will not dismantle capitalism. They will not dismantle white supremacy, dismantle colonialism, dismantle imperialism, and so on. The simple act of direct action, sabotage of those structures can't do that. So that's why that there must be both a creative and destructive approach. So now I'd like to return us back to where we started, which is in that creative aspect. The creative aspect is often hard for people because it takes some, vision to foresee the alternative and to build the alternative now. It was very tempting for several generations of revolutionaries to say, I don't know what it's going to look like when it's built. I just know we have to seize the power from the enemy and then we can build it. What we've seen is that did not work. What we do, in fact, have to do is envision the alternative world we seek to construct. And we will not be able to construct it in its entirety. That's unfortunately impossible because we live entangled in a society of domination. But we must construct these horizontal power structures, which actually have some hope of opposing hierarchical power, and as they expand, emancipating or liberating more and more people. So it should be said that at the foundation, it is crucially important that what is constructed is horizontal. It cannot be a hierarchical response, and that the very construction of a horizontal mechanism is itself a defense of ecology. But I want to emphasize that there are many things that have to be taken into consideration in this process for these horizontal power structures, how indeed they can become active in this process of rekindling the ecology, of reconnecting humanity with nature. So there's different scales. So I don't mean to boil any of this down to a triviality, right? Because some of these things may sound trivial if you just took them one by one or you just thought of them alone, but they're all part of the project. So I'm going to go run through these, and I hope you understand these all have to be part of the picture, that none of these alone could possibly do the job. It's instead going to have to be a combination of many different things. So we've already addressed the destructive component. What do we build? Well, first of all, we need to build some amount of sustainability, of food sovereignty for lots and lots of people. That's one of the, crucial components of how any being within an ecology interacts with that ecology is that it consumes from that ecology. That ecology produces products, you might say, perhaps not the best word, for it to consume. Right? So we need to be trying to bring the production of those basic foodstuffs and those basic ecological, or I shouldn't say ecological, those basic, plants and animal products, which are able to sustain the replacement society. And I want to emphasize that that's not just like, it's not bad, of course, to construct a garden in your backyard. And in fact, that's good. Constructing a garden in your backyard would be a good example of the sort of thing I'm talking about. But not just for food production, that's part of it. But really more broadly for the production of all of those needs that we're going to have. We don't only want food, we want spices. We want the plants that are going to act as medicines to the people that are living within these horizontal power structures. We need to construct things like food forests, things that are going to perpetuate themselves, that don't need our constant re-injection of labor to exist. Once again, that's not to say that, it's not good to farm, it's not good to establish agriculture and to get out there and do the work to till the fields and so on. That's part of it. Okay, but also this aiming towards the recreation of self-perpetuating ecological cycles, creating this idea of a food forest, as I said, where it is essentially a place where we've planted a bunch of these species that can just continue to yield food as they live, and that we don't need to keep coming back and cultivating this, that it cultivates itself, and in doing so, it not only provides us food, which is obviously going to be important, but it creates a self-sustaining ecological structure. I think that's an important aspect of this. We should be trying to cultivate self-perpetuating ecological structures, because self-perpetuation and things that do self-perpetuate, that's at the center of functioning ecologies. Things that are able to enter into feedback cycles, both small and large, and establish feedback cycles. Those things are able to enter a process of self-adjustment. And that is extremely important to the functioning of an ecology. So when we create those self-perpetuating cycles, we are actually kind of restoring some amount of that destroyed ecology. We are reconstructing something of that original ethos that made the ecology function. And I think that's really important, because not only does something like a food forest reestablish that kind of fundamental ecological process, but it's also something for which we have to put in very little labor in the long term, and will have a great deal of dividends. It could pay off for decades or centuries, theoretically. Obviously, some amount of an ethos of reproducibility, of sustainability, of respect and reverence for the environment will have to be present in everything we construct. There will have to be a return to the understanding that we are embedded in the environment, that we are embedded in the ecology, that when we go about, say, farming or interacting with the environment, that we are not just thinking about how we might extract from that environment, but we are thinking about how our actions are actually able to be carried out into the future in such a way that we enrich the environment. We ask ourselves, how does my waste get cycled back into the environment? How can I re-enrich the soil each time? One of the ways that this can be done, for example, is polycropping, having lots of different kinds of crops that are planted instead of monocropping. Monocropping is not self-perpetuating. It typically is going to degrade the soil over a very long period of time. And the only way it doesn't is when they switch out crops one after another. However, monocropping, even in its best occasions, has been shown to do quite a bit of damage to the soil, such that there have been, research into farming techniques which can continually try to sort of return nutrients to the soil, which had been taken out through this process of repetitive monocropping. So polycropping is another aspect of it. But that's just one of many examples, right? Building this ecological ethos into everything we do is extremely important. We should be asking ourselves, how do we reduce the amount of waste that is created? How do we re-enrich the environment with our actions? How do the structures we build actually integrate with the environment? Another aspect I want to emphasize is the concept of planning far ahead. So you may notice that that's kind of like a kernel of an idea that's contained in a lot of things I just discussed. Thinking far into the future, not just thinking about the moment, okay? Because obviously there's more than enough motivation in the moment to get people to begin acting to safeguard the ecology. But I want to emphasize that we're not just trying to save the ecology now. If we want to actually institute something which can safeguard the ecology in a long-term sense, we need to think in a long-term sense. So I'm reminded of this principle of the Iroquois, I believe it was. Correct me if I'm wrong, obviously, but the Iroquois principle of what's called the 7 generations principle. And the 7 generations principle says you don't just plan for now or tomorrow or even just the next generation of people. Every plan you make should be conceived of how it will affect the next 7 generations of people. And of course, that's a significant chunk of time, right? That's a lot of foresight and forethought about how our actions will affect the future. But I think that it must become a central principle, if not obviously exactly 7 generations. There's some amount of arbitrariness there. The idea that we are planning many generations ahead, not just to the generations of our children, not just to the generations of our grandchildren or great-great-great-grandchildren, but far beyond that, to how our actions will last far into the future. And that this type of thinking, where we are planning for eventualities that may come, but may come very far away from now, that is an important component of allowing us to reintegrate with the ecology. Because that's the thing. The ecology functions upon very large timescales for the most part. Obviously, as I've mentioned before, there is some amount of sort of this concept of punctuated equilibrium where it's the same for a long time, then things begin to change rapidly. But in a general sense, the ecology changes over extremely long timescales, what might be called like geological timescales. And that is because slow feedback cycles are a feature of diverse systems. That diverse systems typically function through slow iterative feedback over long periods of time. And the more that some system is allowed to settle into this process of slow feedback, it is able to adjust itself and it is able to produce astonishing emergent properties. And that's part of the reason the ecology is the way it is, because it has had so long on these very long feedback cycles where it was able to adjust gradually to the destabilizations that it experienced. And so thus, if we hope to be reintegrated with the ecology in any significant sense, if we want to achieve what Bookchin calls third nature, we have to start thinking about how to operate in a long-term sense, thinking about the future in a long-term sense. This means that we have to think about the future in many different ways. We have to think about the future of how our organizations will develop. We have to think about the future insofar as that there may be challenges, there may be saboteurs from the enemy camp that try to destroy our structures. And we need to think about how the things we do now will affect people many generations ahead of us, and how these things will affect the ecology many generations from us. So let me say one last thing, because we're kind of coming around to time now. You're going to have to approach these processes that I just laid out differently depending on your context. That's part of the reason why I didn't get super specific, right? Whether you are in an urban, suburban, or rural area is going to make a huge difference to how you try to build out these ecological processes. Obviously, if you're in an urban area, it's going to be hard to find the land to create urban gardens or urban farms and so on. It can be done. Cooperation Tulsa and Cooperation Jackson, for example, are both doing it. And you'll find many cities wherein there are urban garden projects and urban food projects being carried out, but it's hard. It's a little easier in the suburbs where people own a little bit more land. Therefore, they could each develop gardens. And if you could create networks of those gardens out in the suburbs, that could be highly valuable. You could create a sustainable food system in that process. And lastly, if you're in rural areas, you generally going to have the largest access to large plots of untamed wilderness, or even tamed wilderness, but just large plots of land. People in rural areas typically own more land, or at least have access to larger plots of land. So I think those are where you're going to develop a lot of these ecological processes and safeguard a lot of these ecological processes, especially as corporations, big corporations, move in and claim more and more of this land. So we're basically out of time, but I think you can hear there's a lot to be said on this topic. I hope that I've provided you some food for thought, and also implored to you that this must be a revolutionary process, that there is no solution to the climate crisis that is not revolutionary, that this process must be bottom up, must be horizontal, must be controlled by the masses, and that it is our job to create a process that can be controlled by the masses, that plans far ahead and really confronts the crises that we are facing. Anyway, so I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll probably be moving on to new topics in the future. If you liked the video, click like. If you have anything you'd like to comment, please comment below. The comments section, I think, is probably very important for the algorithm. Also, if you are interested in the work I'm doing here, if you think the work that I'm doing here is important, I would like to ask you to go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark, ANARK. And I just want to say, all of you who are patrons, I appreciate you enormously. And if you are considering becoming a patron, I also appreciate that you would even consider such a thing. I know that everybody is really on hard times right now, and it's sometimes hard to come by that money that we can use to even spend on things like this. So for those of you who are helping me produce this channel, who are helping push Anark forward, I really want to say how much I appreciate your help. It has improved my life enormously, and I hope to produce content which will improve your life. Anyway, that's it for this video, everyone. That's the spiel. That's the details. I'll see y'all next time.